Hello, everyone, and welcome to our October Core Advocates Monthly webinar. We are talking tonight about setting and keeping professional learning goals. Thanks so much for joining us, and we're looking forward to a great webinar tonight. We're going to jump right in. We are student achievement partners, and we have a few hosts here from the professional learning team. I'm Tori Filler. I'm a literacy specialist. We also have Nicole Bravo and Jenny on the line. You're going to meet our two presenters and guests in just a moment, but they're here to bring you a fantastic webinar tonight. Just a tiny bit about Core Advocates if you're unfamiliar with us or this is your first time joining. Core Advocates are teachers from all across the country who believe in the power of high quality instruction that's grounded in standards that prepare students for college and careers. And Core Advocates really support one another and their colleagues in understanding and advocating for the standards and embracing the shifts in their instruction. We are over 10,000 educators strong, and we'd love for you to join us if you haven't already, and we'll be giving you a little more information about that at the end of our call. If you do have any questions or want to learn more about us, you can contact Jenny directly. Her email's on the screen. Complete a survey, which we'll be sending a link out at the end of our webinar tonight, or visit our website, which is achievethecore.org, and has tons of free resources for you. We'd love to find out a little bit more about you all tonight. So we'd love to know how many Core Advocate webinars you've attended, whether this is your very first one or you're a Core Advocate All-Star and you've been to 16 or more webinars. So just take a moment to click the answer to the poll question on your screen, whether you've been to 1 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 15, or 16 or more Core Advocate webinars. Don't forget to click Submit after you click your choice. Great, thanks so much for all of you that have already participated. We'd love for you to tweet with us tonight if you're on Twitter. You can find us using the hashtag Core Advocates or at the handle AchieveTheCore. We also have Jenny's handle on the screen and one of our presenters, Mrs. Sublet. Great. So it looks like for many of you, it is your first to fifth Core Advocate webinar. So welcome. We're so pleased to have you here. I see one tiny Core Advocate super alumna at the bottom with 16 or more. Welcome back. Just to get you a little bit oriented to our setup tonight, since there are several new folks on the line, we are using a new platform for our webinars, and you'll see that there are a few elements that you can control on your screen. You can find the question and answer box where you can send a question directly to us on the presenting team, and we'll either try to get you back right away with an answer or tag that question for our Q&A at the very end. You can also find a little box or a resource tab with some of the handouts and hyperlinks to things we'll be discussing tonight. Those should be readily accessible and easy just to click and download. And after the webinar, you'll be receiving a recording via email. We'll also house a recording of tonight's webinar on our website, Achieve the Core. So you'll have access to both the recording and the PowerPoint materials that go along with this session tonight. One more widget that we are using tonight is the group chat. So you should be able to see the group chat tonight and be able to communicate directly with those folks that are on the line. I'm going to turn it over now to two of our fabulous presenters. I want to introduce you to Lisa Goldschmidt. She's the Executive Vice President of Tools and Classroom Resources at Student Achievement Partners. And we're so happy to have one of our Core Advocates on the line, Adrienne Sublet. She's a literacy instructional curriculum coach in Memphis, Tennessee, and she's been doing some excellent work that she's going to tell you about. With that, I'll hand it over to our presenters.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Adrienne Sutherland, and I'd like to share the goals of our webinar for this evening. We're going to explore strategies for developing focused professional goals as an educator. We'll also learn about the Instructional Practice Guide, what it is and what has changed. We'll also take a look at how to find tools to help you plan for aligned instruction and continue to make progress toward your goals over the course of a school year. And you'll understand how the IPG supports goal setting and keeping professional learning goals.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. So this is Lisa, and I'm thrilled to have everyone here tonight. I wanted to start out our discussion talking about setting goals and why we set them and what we're working towards. Educators are no strangers to goal setting. Oftentimes goals are set for you, sometimes in the form of the standards in terms of what is being set as the expectations for students, but they also come from schools, from districts, and states. That all said, it's also important for educators to have goals that they set for themselves, both to meet their aspirations as professionals and to meet the needs of their kids. So when thinking about goal setting and trying to find specific goals to target for a year, they help the most when they focus our efforts, when they allow us to reflect on what matters most, and when they're set up in a way that allows us to track our progress and celebrate our successes. Most importantly, and I think this is critical, goals let us see the intersection between the work we're doing and what our students can achieve. And so focusing on goals that really matter to us and matter to our kids makes a huge difference in what we pursue over the course of the year. I wanted to offer at least one framework for thinking about goal setting. I'm sure many of you have seen this before, this notion of the SMART goal template. It's an approach to setting goals that hopefully allow you to set meaningful targets and then progress towards them. One of our colleagues, Susan Hitt, wrote a blog post for Aligned about setting SMART goals as an educator. And so what you're seeing in the slide right now on the left-hand side is the acronym spelled out, what SMART goals mean. And on the right-hand side were Susan's questions that she posed to herself when she was in the classroom and when she was a coach in order to set goals that would be meaningful to her. So very quickly, just walking through, for those of you who may not be as familiar with this, this structure. The idea of a SMART goal is that you're targeting something that is strategic, that will be important to your work, that really matters, something that's measurable so that you know if you're successful, something that's attainable. And I think this is a place where oftentimes people will fall off the wagon, so to speak, because they target things that may not be within their reach or within their role. So focusing on something that is within your control is critically important to then being able to track towards success. Relevant to you as a teacher, as a coach, and time-bound. So knowing when you mean to achieve your goal and being able to set up milestones along the way is a really, really helpful way to track your progress. So please take just one moment and think about a goal that perhaps you've already set this year or one that has been on your mind. And as we go through the next couple of slides and talk about resources to help support you in goal setting, keep your goal in mind, and we'll come back to it a little bit later. So what is the Instructional Practice Guide?
Okay, so before we dive into what the Instructional Practice Guide is, we want to have an idea about who's on the session with us tonight. So if you would respond to the question or the poll, how familiar are you with the Instructional Practice Guide? Not at all, a little bit, fairly familiar, or very familiar. So take a moment and respond to that question. All right, go ahead and let's take a look. So more than half of you say not at all. Wow, so we have about 3/4 of you, well, more than 3/4 say not at all or a little bit. We have some of you that say fairly familiar and some say very familiar. So as we go through this, we'll give a high-level overview of the Instructional Practice Guide. And for those of you who are very familiar or fairly familiar, we'll talk some about some of the changes between the previous version and the revised version. So thank you all for sharing that information with us.
So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the guide, it felt important to start with this high-level quote that comes from the actual introduction to the guide itself. The Instructional Practice Guide is a K-12 classroom observation rubric that prioritizes what's observable in and expected of classroom instruction when instructional content is aligned to college and career-ready standards, including the Common Core Suite standards. Purposely focuses on the limited number of classroom practices tied most closely to the content of the lesson. Designed as a developmental tool rather than an evaluation tool, the IPG supports planning, reflection, and collaboration in addition to coaching. There are 3 critical pieces that it feels very important to say up from the outset in terms of what makes this tool this tool. First, content is at the center. Content is fundamental to the purpose of this tool and what goes on in the classroom, and it's the primary focus. We'll talk about that a bit more as we go through. The second piece is it is intended to be a developmental tool. It is intended to be a tool that allows for discussion and growth over the course of the year. So in both of those ways, the fact that it's focused on what's being taught and also on this idea of growth and repeated conversation, this is a tool that is very well aligned with the idea of tracking your progress and setting goals across the year. And finally, this last piece of the tool supporting planning, reflection, collaboration, and coaching, it fits very well with cycles of inquiry, with PLC groups, with individual goal setting. It can be used in a variety of ways, and it was designed to be used in a variety of ways. And so hopefully, as we talk through it more over the course of the evening, you'll be able to see ways it fits with the goals that you have in mind. So the design of the Instructional Practice Guide is unique in some ways. The first, hopefully not terribly unique, but it is grounded in research, as many observation tools are. The specific research that we looked to when designing this guide is the research behind the shifts. This idea that what's most important to focus on in preparing students for college and careers has to be at the center of what we look for in classrooms. The second piece, and you may have noticed this in the previous quote, is that there are intentionally limited number of look-fors contained within the Instructional Practice Guide. This rubric has about 12 to 15 indicators, depending on which version you're looking at, which grade and subject. This is different from the kinds of observation tools many people are familiar with, and they have 40, 50, 60 indicators. This is also based in research and best practice, and the idea that there's only so much that someone can focus on and give good feedback on in any given observation period. And so we've chosen very carefully what we have highlighted and escalated in this tool. Next, as I mentioned, it's content focused. So in each part of the tool, content comes up again and again. And finally, it's grade and subject specific. So it's hard to be content focused if you're not speaking about what the content is for that particular grade or subject area. In this case, we have a K-2 ELA, a 3-12 ELA, a K-8 math, and a high school math version. Now, thinking about the structure of the guide, whether it's math or ELA, there are 3 overarching core actions that the tool focuses on. The first is always the content of the lesson, what is being taught. And the questions are very targeted at specifically what is being taught in the classroom that day. The second core action is dedicated to instruction. So what is the instruction that's happening in the context of the content that's been selected? So not pedagogy just overall, but actually how is the content of the lesson coming to life in what the teacher is doing? And the third core action is about students relationships to the content, to other students, tasks at hand, and to the teacher. So you can see below, this is just one core action and indicator pulled out of one of the guides, but there are four different features of it that are circled. You can see the core action at the head. Underneath it, this is one of the specific indicators. And then on the right-hand side is rating. Wanted to call attention to this because we said it was a tool intended for observation and reflection and not evaluation. And we debated heavily early on about whether ratings belonged in the tool. We include them because we got a lot of feedback from people who were trying to use it, that the guiding language the ratings have is helpful when having discussions and facilitating expectation setting between teachers and coaches. We don't consider ratings to be a necessity in using the tool, but a lot of people do find having conversations around the language of the rating to be useful. Obviously, it's all optional and how you use it and how it works for you, but felt important to call out that notion of ratings in the non-evaluative tool. And the last piece, the largest circle, is around empty space. And that is because what is very valuable in the use of this tool is low inference note-taking, making sure to capture what's happening in the context of a lesson so that feedback can be given and shared. So I mentioned before this relationship between the instructional practice guide and SMART goal setting. And I've chosen here one example of one core action from one of the guides. But you can see on the screen, there are a few features of the way the guide is set up and the language of the guide that really do support focused strategic goal setting and the idea of cycles of inquiry and coming back to these discussions over and over throughout the year. So this idea that you could have a goal that was focused on specific types of text, looking at the qualitative and quantitative text features, specifically choosing the anchor text you want to use and being attentive to making sure kids are experiencing high quality complex text, looking specifically at the way you're knowledge building and developing vocabulary throughout the year, coming back to these questions over and over again through observation and through planning really does allow you to focus in pretty narrowly on targeted goals related to what the content is and what your students' needs are. The other thing is, while this is all an effective way to set a goal as an individual teacher, these are also categorically things that could be part of school improvement plans or action plans within schools. So specific aspects of the content that's selected and a focus on different aspects of instruction are often tied to these overarching goals. And so the tool can be used in a variety of ways for individuals or groups. The Instructional Practice Guide has been available in the field for a number of years now. And over time, we found that there are many people who've used it over and over again, and we always have new users coming to us with new questions and new ways they're considering adapting the resource. So we went through a rather extensive data collection process where we talked to many, many people who were using the tool to try to get a sense for what their questions were, where they were struggling, where they had made adaptations, what support they needed. And over the past summer, we made some revisions to support what we understood were needs and places where additional clarity was needed in the tool. There is a post on our blog Aligned that talks about these changes at a pretty high level, but goes into it specifically in ELA and mathematics. So if you're interested in knowing more about those specific changes because you're familiar with the tool, you can find more there. I will go through over the next couple of slides a few features of the new changes, a few places where we've changed the focus or articulated things better in order to better support the needs in the field. So we'll jump into those right now. So I'd like for everyone to join in an activity. What you see before you is, on the left-hand side, the language from Indicator 1B from the previous version of the ELA Literacy 312 tool. On the top, there's the language of the indicator, and on the bottom is the language of the rating that went along with it. Then on the right-hand side is the indicator language and the rating language for the new instructional practice guide for the revisions. And so we would like for everyone to, Tori, is it enter into the chat box or Q&A?
Yes, we would love for everyone to, we're going to make a quick change to use the question and answer box that you see on your screen to answer what do you notice about the differences between the previous instructional practice guide language and the new instructional practice guide language. And we'll be seeing those responses and get to share out some of the things that you all are noticing. And just to remind you again, in case you're new to the IPG, the top part of the first row is the indicator, and the second row is the rating language that's associated with that indicator. Just a minute to type in what you notice about those two versions. And as you're thinking about that question, just another quick reminder that we are making a small change to, instead of typing your answer into the group chat box, that you'll please use the Q&A box. Great, see some great answers coming in. We'll give you another about 30 seconds if you haven't been able to get your answer in while we read some of the responses. And just a reminder, as we're getting those last answers in, that you can check out the resource tab to find a copy of the instructional practice guide. So I wanted to share a few things, some great responses. Thanks so much for participating. Several folks noticed that there's a lot more specificity in the new instructional practice guide language around the measures that you're using to describe the anchor text. So there's a space to list the quantitative, qualitative, and approximate grade band for the anchor text. A lot of folks sharing that it is much more specific, which is true. And a great answer from Roxanne. She noted that there is deliberate attention to the components of what makes a text complex, and that the previous instructional practice guide didn't list the considerations of what makes a text complex. Great, keep those answers coming. And Lisa, I think I'll flip it back to you for the next slide.
Wonderful, thank you. So I'm delighted that you were able to spot that many things that quickly. Many of you noticed this addition of the word anchor text. And this was a really important realization that we had through a lot of discussion, that there were a number of people who, when they started using the ELA Instructional Practice Guide, because we had not explicitly talked about a variety of text types or the different uses of text, were wondering whether if an anchor text, if a complex text was not being used in a lesson, whether they could still use the guide to do an observation, or whether, because the guide is built to support observation in the context of the content, if the content wasn't there, that you just sort of had nothing to discuss or give feedback about. And so we have very intentionally built anchor text in when we're referencing whether an anchor text was used, and then also mentioned building knowledge as another option for a way a text might be used. Whether or not a text is used is still a primary question, and we hope the texts are being used almost always in some capacity, but the type of text you choose may vary based on the intent of the lesson, and that is a critical thing to know and for us to try to reinforce through the use of this tool. Another way in which that was supported is you may have noticed, in addition, under a new indicator, there's a rating of NA, anchor text not in use, because it's possible that that is true, but then what text is in use or what is happening in the center of the lesson. So that was a very big change and a very important one. A few other things just to call out, and some of you mentioned being more specific about qualitative text features was an important part of helping clarify what was meant when we referenced qualitative text. And so we tried to make that more explicit, and it comes out quite a bit in Correction 2 in terms of instruction as well. How does the instruction support the aspects of the text that are going to be complex for kids? Next, we increased the clarity in Correction 3. We had a lot of questions about the indicators in that correction. There was a perception that there was some overlap in them that was confusing people or making it so some of the indicators weren't used as readily because people saw them as being duplicative. And so we've really tried to clearly and cleanly articulate differences between those indicators. And finally, this is a very big one. Previously, we had a Core Action 1 dedicated to K2 foundational skills, in addition to a Core Action 1 dedicated to reading and listening. And what we have found is that the core action that was dedicated to foundational skills was not nearly enough support for an observation of a dedicated foundational skills lesson. One that is research-based that really supports foundational skill development. And so we've removed that core action and instead created and posted a new tool called the Foundational Skills Observation Tool. That's really dedicated to what's most important in a research-based foundational skills lesson. And so I hope anyone on the phone who does work in K2 foundational skills will take some time after this session to also check that out. So now I'd like to do the same activity with math. The chart in front of you is structured the same way as the chart you just saw. The top row is the indicator language, and beneath it you'll find the rating language for the previous version and the new version of the IPG. So please just take a moment, use the Q&A box, and let us know what you see.
And just a quick reminder that unfortunately the group chat is not up and running right now, so we'd love for you to use the Q&A box instead of the group chat to answer this question. Thanks.
Okay, we saw some really great responses come through. One thing that I want to call out, several of you mentioned enacted lessons. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. So enacted lessons, let's keep that in mind with the new IPG. Also looking at the language around the goals and the standards, like the grade level standards. So going from the information about the depth of the grade level clusters, like being from including that information about what could be more vague about the depth of the grade level clusters, to just being within the grade level standards is something else that was mentioned. And then I saw another comment about the focus is narrowed to enacted. And then I see one more on here that says the lesson focus is specific to only within grade level standards or outside grade level standards. So thank you all for sharing. All right, back to you, Lisa.
Thank you. I am, again, just delighted by how much you were all able to pick up in a very short on-the-spot review. This notion of enacted lesson versus lesson was a point of confusion that it took a little while to uncover. Because Core Action 1 is about the content of the lesson, there was quite a bit of confusion about whether it was asking for what was planned for the lesson or what was enacted, what actually happened during the course of the lesson in regards to the content. And so we've included now this idea of enacted so that we really emphasize that the tool, when used for observation, is really about what is happening in the classroom, what's happening that day. We also, several of you I noticed mentioned that we took away this reference to depth of the grade level clusters and content standards. That as a concept is still critically important, but what we found is people sometimes lost the forest for the trees when talking about the depth of the standards. It was a place that in the abstract, having this conversation was not particularly useful. People became overwhelmed about how do you analyze the depth, how do you know whether it's the right depth or not. But through the course of discussing the observation, looking at the instruction, looking at the tasks that were given to students, understanding how students were responding and working together, a lot of those discussions about whether or not the lesson got to the necessary depth of the standards would come out. And so rather than forcing that content into one indicator, we found that people got there reasonably quickly on their own through just regular discussion. A few other points to call up. One is that one of the indicators in Core Action 2 used to make reference to mathematical errors. And what we've recognized is that if there are uncorrected mathematical errors in a lesson, that should be called out no matter what. So unrelated to a specific indicator or whether that indicator is present in a lesson or not, if there are mistakes in a poster on the wall or some error happens during the course of a lesson that for some reason is not caught and not corrected, that's something an observer can give feedback on to someone whose classroom they're observing that will be useful and shouldn't be held back based on whether or not the other piece of an indicator is present. So a few other pieces we've again clarified in response to frequently asked questions. So we've really focused on the purpose of an indicator. There were a few places where, for instance, an indicator used to talk about how many examples a teacher gave, and the purpose of it was not to actually count examples, but to look for the reason examples were given and whether or not that matched the intent of the instruction and reinforced the content of the lesson. And so we've adjusted language so that we don't emphasize quantitative features of lessons, and what we really mean is to focus on the qualitative work that's being done. And finally, there were a few places where time and time again, we heard from people who were using the tool regularly that the concept was critically important, but very difficult to discuss in the context of a 15-minute or class-long period observation. That these were concepts that needed to be returned to time and again and needed to be considered in the context of planning. And so those key areas were moved to beyond the lesson, which we'll also talk about in a moment. So how can the IPG and other tools support planning for aligned instruction? Well, planning for what is going to be observed is a critical component of using the IPG and some other related tools for setting goals and for progress checking against them. Some of the considerations to keep in mind are things like making sure there are consistent structures and protocols that everyone that can keep everybody on the same page. So if everyone is setting goals, for instance, using the Instructional Practice Guide, you can develop a language, areas of focus, a way of conducting these cycles of inquiry that allow for success and progress checking and shared expectations. Agreeing on those with a coach or a colleague, or even just identifying for yourself where you're going to focus and how you're going to come back to it is really critical when you're thinking about progress checking across a year. Next, in order to prepare to meet your goals, and particularly if you're looking for observation, you want to make sure that you've planned for what's going to be observed as you've done your lesson planning. And finally, thinking about the focus of your work and thinking about how it applies to not only the lesson itself, but then the unit, the semester, the year. So a few tools that would support with these different aspects. First, we have a lesson planning tool, and the link is included on the slide. The lesson planning tool was created to support shift-aligned lesson development. For ELA literacy, the focus of the lesson planning tool is building lessons around complex text. So those lessons, when you use the tool, do tend to be more than a 45-minute class period. They tend to be constructed for several days or a week, or sometimes even several weeks. The math version of the lesson planning tool focuses really, really deeply on teaching around a specific standard, and it looks closely at how that instruction and how that lesson will then fit coherently with other instruction that's planned before and after. Two things I wanted to point out, if you do decide to use the lesson planning tool to support your planning and to facilitate your goal setting, is that the tool is built where every prompt includes this link, examples and support. And so it offers lots of resources along the way to answer questions, to help support you to understand how to answer the question that's posed, to show examples of the way that question may be represented in a lesson plan. So there are lots of resources embedded to support lesson development. And the other piece that's critically important is that each prompt is then tied to an aspect of the Instructional Practice Guide. So as you're thinking about your lesson planning, you can reference which of these questions that go into my planning process then feed into observation. So if you're focused on a very specific area of the instructional practice guide for the year and you're setting goals around it, this tool can facilitate planning so that those aspects are observed. And finally, I mentioned earlier, the Beyond the Lesson discussion guide is actually a part of the instructional practice guide. It's on the last page, and it's a set of questions for ELA and math that put the context of the lesson in the broader plan for the year. So it has some very targeted questions that ask about your plan for that day and how that plan extends into your broader planning work. It also offers links to supportive resources if these are things that you want to dive into more closely so that you can extend your planning and you can support your work with tools and resources on the TESA core or other lessons or supports that we can offer to help build out those areas in instruction. So just take one moment before we move to the next part of our session tonight to think about that goal you identified at the beginning and consider whether the IPG or one of these other tools may support you in meeting your goal. Okay, so now I have the great pleasure of asking Adrienne to share some of her experiences using the IPG and working with other educators to set and keep professional learning goals.
Hello again, my name is Adrienne Sublet, and as you can see, I'm from Memphis, Tennessee. I have had wonderful experiences working with the IPG. In my current role, I work for the Whitehaven Empowerment Zone, and that is a turnaround model where I support several schools in the community, and we're really working to help encourage our students to be strong readers, writers, communicators, mathematicians, so that they can truly be college and career ready. In our district, in the Shelby County school system, our goal is Destination 2025. And one thing that we found, like by Destination 2020, by the year 2025, we want our students to be college and career ready. And so one thing, it's like, what does that really look like to be college and career ready? Like, how do we make that a reality? And how do we make that more than just a catchy slogan and something that looks good on a T-shirt? And so one thing that we started doing in our district years ago, we began utilizing the IPG for both reading and math. And I want to share a couple of my experiences with you about the reading one. One thing I do want to call out about that as far as the IPG, it's really important to keep in mind the IPG is an amazing tool. Like, it's full of very useful information. It's research-based. You definitely want to give it to everyone and say, yes, let's use this right now. But let's keep in mind, we work very hard every day, like whether you're a teacher, whether you're a building leader. And so what I did in my role, I looked at how to incorporate the IPG into existing initiatives and structures that we had in our district. So like looking at our current observation tool that we had in place was one thing that really helped to gain traction with it. You know, so the observation, when you look at observations, that's one way. You know, that's like your final. Like, that's your final exam. Once you take that, that's it. You know, nothing happens after that. But the IPG, I use that more as, you know, your quizzes and something that you take and you get information from it, and then you get feedback from it, you know, and you use that to help support growth. But looking at the relationship between the IPG and the existing structures really helped with that. You know, it really helped with the teachers that I supported so they could see that it wasn't an add-on. Like, I didn't always give teachers a paper copy of the IPG. Sometimes it may just have been using some of the language from the IPG to give them like actionable steps that could help them transform their instructional practices. Another thing I want to share with you is like using the IPG to set goals for individuals. You know, goal setting is crucial. You have to have a target. And so having that target, you can look at it from an individual standpoint. You can look at it from a group standpoint. So one way that I utilize the tool with individual teachers, I've used it with teachers who were ready to look at the actual document, and I had them look at the tool and self-reflect on a lesson and go through and rate it and look to see areas that they felt they needed to improve on. You know, and then we use those indicators and set a goal. And so based on that goal, we determined, you know, what the next steps would be for that. So that's one way that it could be used on the individual level. Another way that it was used was like at the group level. I worked with groups of teachers who would utilize the tool to conduct peer observations, and they would look for trends within their grade levels to see what a goal is that they can use and they could hone in on to help transform practice. A lot of times what I noticed before implementing the use of the IPG to help determine these goals, you know, teachers would utilize data that they would get from assessments, and they would set a goal around a specific question. But the question didn't really get to the root of what the teacher actions were or what the students were doing. So utilizing the IPG really helped them to hone in on teacher actions that should take place and then the expectations for the student outcomes. And so it really helped them look at how they can meet the demands of the standards. I know I did this with one particular school, one grade level, and I had several teachers. One teacher had at least 1 year's growth within a semester based on one of the benchmark assessments that they utilized with the students. Another teacher had 3 years growth that was demonstrated. Now, the students did start off on a pretty low level, but that's still a remarkable amount of growth. So it did yield results. That brings me to providing regular formative feedback. This is not the type of tool that you would want to use for a one and done type of thing. You know, incorporate it into a cycle and use it more in a systematic way. So make sure that it's like a regular way to be able to transform practice and help teachers to grow. It's important to use it for feedback. So having a cycle, when I've used it previously, I use it for 3 or 4 week cycles most times. That would be a way to collect data, like baseline data, and then determine what the treatment would be after that. And then you would come back and review it, review to see if the goals had been met. So, you know, making sure that that formative feedback is given, using language from the IPG is really good because that takes away a lot of the threat. And it also helps with teachers because you have teachers who have various backgrounds and they may not all have the same understanding about what the instruction should look like or how it supports the standards. But using the tool and using that for feedback gives that common language and it makes sure that everyone is on the same page, and it takes a lot of that judgment out. So a lot of that anxiety leaves then. And then that takes me to looking beyond the lesson. So when I initially began using this tool, since it was at the end of the IPG, I would use it at the end of a lesson. But then as I used it more and more and I saw the resources that were there, I realized that it was a tool that I could share with teachers to go through and use it like as a pre-planning tool, like go through, look at the questions and reflect on lessons that they've taught before or a lesson that they plan to teach. And if there's an area that they're uncomfortable with, there are links to different resources that could provide information or, articles or PowerPoint, or, templates, just different resources to help support building the capacity for the teachers and also ensuring that, solid professional learning is taking place and it's supporting the teachers with doing what they need to support the students during instruction. I'd also like to point out that, different teachers have different access points too. So giving them this type of tool takes some of the anxiety off of them, where you don't always have to be the one to point it out if you are a coach. You can let them self-select some of the areas that they want to grow and that they want to learn more about. And they can take this tool, utilize it, and see how it's aligned to the IPG, and then in turn see how it could help improve what they're doing in their classrooms. And it takes it to, help support them with, creating their own personal goals. This could also be used with groups as well. I know a lot of times with schools, they may have school improvement plans that they have to create. And, if some trends come up, they can look at this beyond the lesson guide and look at some of these resources. And some of these resources could be included in some of the action steps, as far as ways to build capacity to help support, building that teacher knowledge or leader knowledge. So that's it.
Great. Thank you so much, Adrienne and Lisa, for the fabulous information tonight. We'd love to spend just a couple minutes answering any questions that you all may have on the line tonight. You can use the question and answer box to put those in. We did have a question come through earlier that I flagged for this wrap-up conversation, so we can start there. Annette asked about how this protocol and these tools can reflect a range of student needs. So students that might need enrichment or students that are working to meet grade level standards. So do either of you have any thoughts on how you might use these tools to support work with a range of students?
Sure. I think there are a few different ways in which the tools support it. I think there are a number of questions or indicators around instruction and then in the student-teacher piece in Core Action 3 that lend themselves to really looking for the ways in which scaffolding is being introduced into a lesson in ways that allow all students access. So in starting with the assumption that the content of the lesson is high quality and aligned to college and career-ready standards and is grade level appropriate, then the focus turns to the ways in which scaffolds are provided and students are incorporated into the work in groups, in providing multiple different ways for them to offer responses in illustrations and examples, so that it's very much a part of the planning, and it incorporates this idea into reflection and observation, but never sort of veering away from this idea that all kids need access to the high quality content, the good stuff. Adrian, I don't know if you had specific recommendations from your work with teachers about how to address those issues.
So one thing that I would say, especially working with your students that need to be pushed a little bit more, when you look at Core Action 3, that's really where you get to responding to the students' needs, whether they're struggling students or whether they need that enrichment. So I would definitely encourage you to spend a little bit more time looking at those core actions, and it may be, more of just having those thoughts around, like reflecting on that. Like what did you do, or like if you're a teacher, what did you do to address those students who understood the task that they were given or understood the questions that they were asked? Were they generating questions on their own? Were they asking questions to other students? Like what type of discourse were they engaged in? That kind of goes back to Core Action 2 as well. So, like looking at the protocol, you just have to take a look, or, looking at the IPG, take a look at Core Actions 2 and 3, and then you'll begin to see how it meets the needs of individual students. Like it's not a cookie cutter approach for every child, or every student. Like it definitely encourages teachers to think beyond, what's in their curriculum. Like you have to look at what your students are doing, and if you have that student that's sitting in your class who's performing above grade level, is that child asking questions? What are you doing for that child? And then you go to that Beyond the Lesson Guide, and there are resources that you could be directed to help support that teacher, or if you're the teacher, it could help support you with finding additional opportunities to push that child beyond what that standard is calling for.
That's fantastic, Adrian. Thanks so much. We had one other question that I'll just answer quickly from Shannon. If you're on the Achieve the Core website and you see the Instructional Practice Guide and some associated resources that are part of our video library or Instructional Practice Toolkit, Shannon asked if those videos are for practicing the tool or whether they're model lessons for reference. And they are not intended to be exemplar lessons. They are real classrooms, real teachers, real kids. You can certainly, and we would encourage you to use them to practice your use of the tool and to possibly norm with colleagues. We have those resources are included in our Instructional Practice Toolkits, which you can find online, but check the video library out if you're eager for those resources. So thanks so much for your time tonight and your great comments through the question and answer box. If you're not a member of our Core Advocate Network already, we'd love for you to join us. As we said at the beginning, we're a national network. We also have several state networks. Those folks are connected more deeply, working on initiatives in their states, and those states with networks are highlighted in green on that map on your screen. If you join our network, you'll get a great monthly newsletter that tells you all about the free resources on our website, keeps you up to date on things that are happening at SAP. And also it often includes invitations to be part of creating new resources or being involved in other opportunities with either our organization or our partner orgs. So you can join us by signing up at our website, Achieve the Core. The link is right there on the screen for you. We're also on Twitter, Facebook, and Pinterest. And there's that link one more time to sign up on the network. there's a brief survey that will just help us get a little bit of information about you. And we'd love for you to join us again next month. We have a fabulous webinar. It's entitled Math Language Routines, the what, the why, the how. It's on November 7th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. This webinar is going to be a mini webinar, so it'll be 30 minutes instead of an hour. And you can read the description on the screen, or when you get the materials, there'll be a live link to register. As I said, if you sign up for our network, you'll just get a monthly newsletter that can help you to register for those opportunities as they come. So thank you so much. We know that you are busy folks and that you all, it was so lovely to spend this time with you. We hope to see you again soon. And please do fill out our survey so we can best know how to, better serve you next time around. And we'd love for you to join the network if you haven't already. Have a great evening and thanks so much.